Hi, my friends. My name is Zachary Woods. I am a biology major here at Southern Nazarene University. I run cross country, just a little bit about who I am. Today I would like to share with you a story of something that God has done in my life. So I'll just get right into it. So it was the end of my first semester of college. That was fall of 2021. In fact, it was finals. Christmas break was about to begin. It was the week that my father went to the hospital with COVID. But little did we know, COVID was not the whole story. You see, when my dad went to the hospital, they put him on some oxygen, and he was doing great. The doctors were confident that he would be released in a day or two, but we were unprepared for what else was going on in my dad's body. As it would turn out, my father had an ulcer in the upper part of his small intestine. The effects of his ulcer were magnified by blood thinners. My dad had never been on blood thinners until he went into the hospital, but apparently COVID had been known to cause irregular heartbeat, which in turn can cause blood clotting, which in turn can cause heart attack or stroke. Because of this risk, they put him on blood thinners. This caused him to bleed through the ulcer. My father had bled almost completely out when my mother came into the room one morning. She called a nurse who quickly called a code blue. In layman's terms, that means the patient is either dead or near dead. But through a series of miracles, they found the ulcer, they stapled it shut, stopped the bleeding, and somehow saved my dad. They saved his life. The issue was he was in a very unstable condition for weeks, and when he woke up from it all, it was clear that he had had a stroke. We don't quite know what caused the stroke. It was likely either blood clotting from being taken off the blood thinners, or because of the nature of his stroke, might be more likely that it was caused by the blood loss itself. Because of the stroke and all the stress that my dad's body had been through, he would spend the next few months in the hospital. So this is my dad's story. But how does this relate to my story? For the first few weeks of my dad being in the hospital, I was unsure if he'd ever come home. After we knew that he was going to make it, my family had to face the fears that my dad may never be able to walk or talk again, which, by the way, his speech is made a full recovery and he can walk with a walker. But anyway, yes, praise God. So, I was never really allowed to visit my dad when he was in the hospital because of COVID. And my mom, his only allowed visitor, was there as much as she could be. So this left me at home alone pretty much the entirety of my Christmas break. This might sound strange, but those few months were actually some of the best of my life. They were some of the hardest months of my life, but Jesus was with me through every painful tear. I usually worked with my dad on on breaks, so I had no schoolwork, no work with my dad, and no one around except Jesus. I had no one to turn to except him. And every night I spent alone in the cold, dark house, I knew I wasn't alone. I had Jesus with me every step of the way because I trusted him. But when spring came around, school began, and my dad came home. My whole family had to adjust to my dad's new condition, and I was forced to balance a lot of new things with school that I hadn't had to balance before. I was going through many trials, but the trials I faced after my dad got home, they didn't seem as big. Nevertheless, I was no longer doing as well. I began a downward spiral that really began as my sophomore year began. So what happened? I would like to read you a passage from Matthew to help explain. This is Matthew 14:25 through 33, and this is the NIV version. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter said, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat with him worshipped, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Like Peter, I was sinking the first half of my sophomore year. Even though the waves got smaller, they never went away. As my sophomore year began, I got too busy looking at the waves. I quit looking at Jesus. I completely lost focus on Jesus. This is what made the first half of my sophomore year one of the hardest seasons of my life. It wasn't until spring of that year, a year after my dad got home, that I cried as Peter did, "Lord, save me." And even in my doubt, Jesus reached out his hand and caught me. My focus became a lot better. I was doing a lot better. However, there was still a piece of me that kept wanting to wander. I was 95% focused, but not completely. This final piece of me, God took away on a mountain in Alaska. I was on a Sims trip, which I do recommend Sims, and we were camping with the church youth group. On this camping trip, some of us hiked up a mountain, and I was having the time of my life. But before I knew it, when we reached the top, or close to the top, the ground became shale. And it filled me with terror, because every step, I could feel the ground moving from beneath my feet. It felt like at any moment, I could have been swept away in a river of rock. Eventually, we turned around, having never made it to the top, and we went back to solid rock. Once we were back on solid grounds, I was having the time of my life again. This experience made me realize that Jesus is my solid rock. When I trust in him, the ground in my heart is solid. When I trust in him, I can walk through the crashing waves of the surrounding sea. It wasn't until I lost focus of Jesus that I began to sink, and solid ground in my heart became unsteady. After this experience, there was no turning back. God had my attention, and even though I still walk through many uncertainties, trust me, the waves have not gone away. I am walking on solid rock again. But something else I learned in Alaska is that there are many people out there walking on shale. In fact, I'm quite certain some of you may be walking on shale. So how do we get back to solid rock? I would like to quote last year's verse, which I didn't start obeying until the end of my sophomore semester, or spring year. Yeah. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, not 95%, but all. And lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Thank you, my friends.
Hey guys, my name is Jenna Bay, and I'm a sophomore student athlete here at SNU, and I'm majoring in biochem. Never in a million years did I think I'd be up here talking to you guys, but I'm so excited to be here and to have the opportunity to share my story. To start off my story, I want to give you guys a little bit of my background. I grew up in a small town in northwest Oklahoma, and I was born into a pretty athletic family. My dad was an All-American linebacker at SWASU. My mom played some volleyball. My two older brothers went D1 in their respective sports, and my younger brother is going to play college sports as well. So yeah, sports were a huge part of my childhood. Because of this upbringing, I knew from a young age that I wanted to play college basketball. It was something I loved, and I knew that I wanted to make my parents and my hometown proud. Fast forward to my sophomore year of high school, I was having a pretty good season up to that point and was beginning to have a few college looks. At this point in my life, I truly began to find my identity in basketball. It wasn't just something I did, it became who I was. For me, every good game was a high and every bad game was a low. It was such a roller coaster of emotions all the time. About midway through that really good season, I ended up tearing my ACL and my season was over. And as a 16-year-old whose dream was to go play college basketball, I honestly felt like that was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. In the blink of an eye, basketball was over and I was left questioning my identity. During this time of my life, I experienced anxiety and depression like I never had before, and it was easily one of the hardest times of my life. And though I had grown up in the church and always had a good relationship with God, I felt further away from him than ever before. I was angry at him, and I felt like he had let me down. God had placed that passion in my heart for basketball, so we were supposed to be in it together, right? I know this might seem like a bit much, but I was in such a bad place mentally, spiritually, and emotionally that I really began to question if life was worth living. My recovery was honestly a struggle. This was during the beginning of COVID, so I felt like things were just dark all the time. I didn't pick up my Bible or pray or talk to God just because I didn't feel like he was there. And though I knew that God hadn't abandoned me, it felt like it. Deep down, I knew that he was there, but my foundation was shaken. At that time, I didn't know what it was, but looking back now, I know it was the power of prayer from others. But during this hard season, something led me to pick up my Bible and talk to God again. I'm going to be honest, at first, it wasn't all perfect. Things were still hard, and I still struggle with my injury and depression. But what I can tell you is that I was met with God's unending and never-failing grace and love. Through this experience, I learned how important it is to find your identity in Christ. Identity is defined as who or what a person or thing is. It's so easy as students or athletes to find our identities in the things we do. We spend so much time with our respective sports and classes or at a job that we can so easily tie our identity to those things. However, when we tie our identity to worldly things, it only leaves us feeling unfulfilled and unsatisfied. The only identity that will complete us is the identity that we find in Christ. It comes from knowing that you are a child of God and that nothing can or ever will change that. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of the book Shaken by Tim Tebow. If you haven't, it's a really good book and you should read it. But in the book, he says that identity comes not necessarily from who we are, but from whose we are. I know that I'm a child of God, and I hope that you guys know that you are too. We are God's children. Nothing will ever change his love for us. This truth is what helped me not only get through that hard ACL surgery, but also 3 shoulder surgeries after that, a diagnosis with a dysautonomia my freshman year of college, and continued medical challenges to this day. Through all of the uncertainty that life may give me, I am certain of one thing. I am a child of God, and my identity is found in him alone. This statement has brought me a lot of peace and hope during difficult times, and as you guys go through difficult times as well, I hope you can remember where your true identity lies also. Thank you.
Today I'd like to share a story about a boy from Pietermaritzburg, KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Now this boy's journey began in 2002, but it was at the age of 12 that his life took a twist. His mom resigned from teaching to build her dream house 15 minutes away from the city. And when push came to shove, he had to go work at the age of 12. There was no income. Up at 5 a.m. in the morning, back at 7 p.m., earning 20 rand a day, which is equivalent to $1.06. One day, he came back home to find his week's saving gone. He asked his mother and brother where his savings had gone. They replied, "We bought milk and bread to make it through the day." This is where Christ began flexing his muscles in this boy's life. In his final year of primary school, the little boy from Pietermaritzburg receives a call to go play rugby for one of the biggest boys' schools in South Africa. Here he would go on to learn a lot about being an all-rounder, being a monster on the field, and a gentleman off it. He learned culture, love, respect, and grew towards God. Before being admitted to boarding school in the sophomore year of high school, he was a commuter, walking a mile and taking 2 taxis to get to school. This wasn't even the hardest part. He wore black leather shiny shoes to get to school, and being the boy he was, he took pride in how he looked and how presentable he was. So he had to make sure that each and every morning he got to school clean, even though he had to walk a mile on dirt. Unfortunately, he was back at being up at 5 a.m. and being back home at 7 p.m. The same life, masked by education. Not until Christ intervened. Teachers at his school noticed how tired and sleepy he was in class and how disorientated he was during sports practices. And so they took him home one day to assess his living situation. This little boy, breaking boundaries, becoming the school's head boy in his senior year, Now it was time for college. But where to next when he had offers from the University of Cape Town, Brighton, Liverpool, and Kaplan International College in London, yet had no means to pay for college. His mom, on a teacher's salary in South Africa, earned $15,000 rands, which is equivalent to $800 per month. A single mother, a family of 4, on $800 per month. He was driven by saying, faith knows no boundaries. A plane ticket was all he needed. To America he came. An academic scholarship and soccer scholarship is saving grace, God his ultimate provider. He flew to America on a one-way ticket, never knowing when he'd come back home, as that was all his family could afford. To the other side he went, but the grass was no greener. Away from his friends and family, the dark days were darker. Family and friends were $1,300 away. After his first full semester, during his first freshman year at Southwestern Christian University, he almost dropped out. $9,000 in debt. There was no way out. Once again, God had other plans for the kid. During the December holidays, his roommate's family took him in. After assessing his living situation, they agreed to help him get back on his feet. Family away from family was what he found. With them, he would learn means to provide for himself, cover his school fee debt, and after his first full freshman semester, he was able to purchase his own vehicle. Now in his third year of college in America, he goes to Southern Nazarene University. I am Sanele Mdingi, the boy from Pietermaritzburg, KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. A junior playing rugby with a story to tell and a story that is still being written. Thank you, guys.